Hello, hello. Great to have everybody on today. Today is our August 30th monthly open forum Q&A about anything related to Afterlife. So great to have everybody on today from around the world. Like I said, feel free to ask any questions about anything. So there's no particular agenda for those of you who've never been here before. There's no lecture on any particular topic other than the general topic of the afterlife. We talk about any questions that you guys have. Okay. So, and I try to keep it to about an hour and a half. Do this every month on the 30th of every month at the same time. And just to be crystal clear, if you guys have already registered for this session or any previous session, I think at least February, March, or April to present, if you've registered for any of those, it's the same link. So I've figured out how so that you guys can use the same link. You don't have to re-register every time. We have like 120 people or something who are registered, some of whom may come and go at various times from these sessions. Okay. Any new people obviously have to register in order to get the the link, etc. Okay, so who wants to go first? Joe, you want to kick it off, Joe? I know. Let's see, Joe. Ask to unmute. There you go. Click on that, Joe. We were talking about a question that you had. Do you want to ask that question first, Joe?
Yeah. The fact that we were all pretty much raised in some form or another a fantasy world about what the other side is, and that it's even, I hate to use the word, more human than we ever thought, as it turns out, and that Jesus and John the Baptist are working on helping square things away. We've come to find out, even on the other side, much less here. And to me, that is such a dynamic understanding that I'm really impressed with it. Now, to try to explain that to my not just TM friends, but my Christian friends, wowzer. It's not easy, and it's hard to say how far to go with these people, or do we just be content with the work that we're doing here and not concern ourselves by trying to, in quotes, wake them up, more or less. See what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I totally understand. Totally understand. So a lot of stuff in your comment question there, Joe. Thanks for sharing that. That's really, really good stuff. Really interesting stuff. Because you're right. I grew up in a Christian church. Not everybody did. Some people may be Jews, Muslims, Buddhists. Some people may have grown up in a more agnostic or even atheistic household when they were kids and so forth. Doesn't really matter. Or just general spiritual without going to any religious institutions. But you guys know my history. I grew up in Norwood, Massachusetts, and went to the Protestant church, one of the Protestant churches. Went to their first congregational church. And yeah, we talked about heaven on the other side and this and that. And yeah, I grew up in this world of religious schooling, if you will, going to Sunday school. Where it was fantasy kind of, it's this wonderful place and this and that and so forth. And I think that there's some truth to that about it being a wonderful place relative to what? That's compared to what I always say, right? But is it a fantasy place the way a lot of people fantasize in movies or books or this or that? That's the thing. I think you're right. I think it's more in my experience now. So, okay, fast forward, another, many, many decades from having grown up in the Sunday school fantasy world. I've had experiences personally now on the other side many times this lifetime. In others, I don't have an NDE or in between lifetime thing, although I do have some memories of being in between lifetime. I have experiences that I currently have memories of that happened this lifetime in 20th century, Kelvin Chin lifetime, 20th and 21st century. So, and what struck me the most thing is kind of what you're saying, which is it doesn't match with the fantasy world that I grew up with. Now, that said, if you go on YouTube and you watch a lot of these YouTube videos and this and that and whatever, and you hear people talk about NDEs, a lot of it does sound like it does match what I remember my fantasy
Yes.
heaven experience to be, right, when I was in Sunday school. But I think, and this is my opinion, of course, everything's my opinion. But my opinion is that they are filtering it through that fantasy belief that they still are imbued with. Their consciousness, whether they realize it or not, is still imbued with that filter of their fantasy belief system. So they have an NDE, they go the other side, they go, whoa, yeah. It matches what their fantasy is. Everything's perfect, that kind of fantasy. It is a place of light. So so this is where it gets gray. This is a really interesting point, Joe, that you raised, because it's not a black and white issue. It's not a black and white answer. It can be perceived as fantasy that it is a world of light. That to me is not fantasy. That to me is the way it is. It is a field of light, et cetera, et cetera. So structurally, I think that a lot of the structure in terms of the experience that you hear people talk about NDEs, or glimpses of the other side, or if they're a psychic or a medium, they don't have to have an NDE, they can experience it or whatever, that it's a field of light. I think that matches with my experience anyway, that it is a field of light. Could somebody interpret that and just say, whoa, it's just a fantasy world of light? Okay, somebody could say that. But what I'm referring to, and I think what you're referring to when we use the word fantasy in the context of heaven, what we're talking about, what I grew up with from church, was that it was a place where everything was perfect. That was the notion that I was taught, that everything is perfect. There's no suffering. There's no negative anything. That the negative anything, and I didn't grow up in a church, a hellfire and brimstone church, but I know many of my students have. So there's this notion in this fantasy that a lot of people have of heaven being the perfect place. Everything is all good, and that everything that's bad is a place called hell. That is completely blown out of the water from my experience and from many people's experiences who've had NDEs. Again, not all, but many of the people's experiences of NDEs will match that, okay? That match the fact that there is no hell and that there is this place of light. The fantasy part that you're talking about and alluding to, Joe, I think is when people go that next step and they say, everything is perfect in heaven. There's nobody can have any bad thoughts. Nobody can do any bad things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's my experience, is that it's not like that on the other side. Now, is it much better than, this comes back to the first thing I said, as compared to what? Is it much better than, in terms of this, people doing good and bad stuff? Is it better there than on planet Earth? I think so. That's been my experience. Yeah, it's better. It's a lot better. So I don't think that's fantasy, you see, but I think it's fantasy when you take it to the absolute perfection belief. That's the thing, you see. So that's where it's gray, you see, and I can understand where somebody would come from Earth and they would go to heaven and they go, or Valhalla or Nirvana, whatever you want to call it, Elysium, if we're talking about ancient Greece and Rome, or a belief system, whatever you want to call that place. When you go there from here, you got to go, oh, wow, it's perfect. Yeah, because why? You don't have to go to a job. You don't have to worry about getting sick. You don't have a biological body. You don't have to make money. You don't have to worry about being poor or rich or in between or whatever. All of that stuff goes away. Those are big, huge stressors. So yes, that goes away when you biologically die. So does it feel heavenly? Yeah, I would describe it as a heavenly feeling on the other side, but it's not this perfect. That's the fantasy part that I think you're alluding to, Joe, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Now back to your other
Yeah.
question, Joe. Yeah, that helps. Yeah. No, so your other part of your question was about explaining this notion of, we'll call it non-perfection or non-nirvana or non-enlightenment or whatever you want to call it on the other side to your TM or your Christian friends you mentioned, Joe. My advice is no, unless they're curious. My advice, and this is what I do in my world, Kelvin Chin lifetime world. I don't go up walking around saying, hey, this is what's really going on, unless somebody is curious. If they ask me, I'll have a conversation with them, but I'll be very judicious about it, depending on where their belief system is. I try not to step on people's toes, but I would not waste my time, to be honest. There's two things going on. It's wasting my time, but primarily it's respecting their free will to believe whatever they want, Joe and everybody, right? That's crucial to me, because I was not, to be full self-disclosure, Joe, you didn't know me in the 70s when you and I both got involved in TM, in different parts of the world. I was not like that back then. I was trying to convince people not only to learn TM, but to think this way and to believe this way, and anti-Vietnam War, and I still am anti-war. Now, you guys have read my new book, anti-war. This guy is like major battlefield commander, this guy. But no, I've grown since I was a battlefield commander. I've evolved. I've self-reflected. So yeah, I'm anti, war now, but I was more in people's face about it, is what my point is back then. So I have my belief systems. I still have my belief systems now, but I am not in people's face about it, and I don't go to people and proselytize. I am not. That's what I call, those of you who've taken my Afterlife series, not this, but the 6-part Afterlife series, where I spend more time getting into each of these topics. That's what I call a religious apologist. I am not a religious apologist. A religious apologist is somebody who's trying to convert people to their belief system. So it doesn't have to be an organized religion, because many people think of it just as a Christian or a Jewish or a Muslim or an organized religion, Hindu apologist trying to convince people. But no, it can be about any belief. It could be about food or whatever it is. I'll give you advice about food, but I'm not here to tell you you can't eat that.
Kelvin, I lost you.
Choice. That's your choice. Can everybody else hear me still?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you didn't lose. So that's on you, Lorraine. That's your system. So thanks, though.
There you go.
Yeah. So something about your system there. But anyway, does that help, Joe, with your question?
Yeah, that's great. That covers it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. No, it's a really good question. Other questions? I'll open it up. Other questions, folks? Go ahead. Yeah, Stokes. Yeah.
Yeah, so this, first of all, I'll preface this by saying I don't care what Jesus looked like, whether he was white or black or Middle Eastern, but I was in a discussion with some guy locally about that thought Jesus was white. And I mean, guy, he's from the Middle East, so he's probably a Sephardic Jew, and he's probably looks like a Middle Eastern man, so not a white man, not a white guy with blonde hair. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, my memory of Jesus was he was not white, but he's not. But my memory of, if you want to talk just skin tone, okay, my skin tone was darker than his.
Mm-hmm.
Right, I was a Middle Eastern Hebrew, I was a Jew as well, right? And so my skin tone and Andrew's skin tone, I think, again, if you want to really get specific, this is my memory. You can ask Andrew, when you next time George Hammond is on, whatever, you can just ask him. I've never asked him this question, but my memory is that I was the darker of the three of us, I would say. Even though he and I were brothers, you don't always, and I'm not saying this like really noticeable, like, wow, kind of a thing, but that's my memory. Take it for what it's worth. Where does that come from? Who knows? Deep recesses of my memory. But no, he was not white. And, but I think my memory is that I looked more, the way you're describing the local Middle Eastern Jewish look,
Yes.
than Jesus did. He was part of that culture. So, but there's huge range, right? It's just like any culture. There's a range, right? And who knows historically, my mother and father and his grandparents biologically and great grandparents, where they came from, right? And what they deposited into the genealogy, the DNA pool that created what we know as Jesus's biological body, which is different from, what's separate and distinct from our minds. Our bodies are separate and distinct. So he had a body, and I say that separate and distinct because his genealogy was his genealogy. That's what's going to affect his biology, right? How he looked, etc.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my memory. I don't know if anybody else wants to pipe up in terms of what their memory of him was, but that's my memory. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Anything else, Stokes?
Not right off. I just got a text from Jem, and she got on. So
Yeah, good. She's on. Yeah, I saw her in the waiting room and I let her in. That's good. So I want to follow up. Does anybody else have any other questions? I want to follow up on something else that Joe mentioned in his opening thing. But other questions, though, I can go to other questions first. Go ahead. Anybody else? Questions?
Yeah.
Questions? Yes.
Question.
Yes.
Edie.
Edie, go ahead. Yeah.
If one has a fear of death, and my mother had a near-death experience, okay, and it was quite believable. How does all this help to reinforce that so that we don't have a fear of death? Do you all have a fear of death? Do you have a fear of death or no?
I do not have a fear of death. I'll let other people speak to that, and they can chime in if they feel like it. But no, I do not. I have not had a fear of death. I don't know if I've ever had a fear of death, but I have not liked dying. I'm not saying I enjoy dying. You guys know my crucifixion experience is a very painful, unpleasant experience. But the fact of dying I have not had a fear of for a long, for my known memory anyway. Whatever I remember, thousands of years. I almost drowned. You know that story about me, Edie. I think I almost drowned this lifetime when I was 21 years old. Almost drowned in a rip current. Got pulled out into the ocean almost 2 miles, according to what somebody told me later. Wow. Was I scared? Yes. I was scared of dying at that moment. That's not the same as having a fear of death, though. You see the distinction, what I'm making there, Edie? I didn't want to die, and I was afraid to die, and I thought I was going to die and drown, and I willed myself back into my body and willed myself to struggle the 3 or 4 or 5 feet to the surface of the water, and then told myself to just take it easy and not rush. Something like that. I didn't have a whole bunch of thoughts, but that was the feeling that I had. Okay. Does that help?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Kelvin?
yeah, Sharon, share, please.
I think it may be interesting to make the distinction between the fear of death and the fear of suffering. And I just mention this because with my hospice work, some people say, I'm not afraid to die. I just don't want to feel the pain. That's why in hospice, there's the big, push for the morphine. But it's
Right.
interesting, and there are some that may have that fear of death, for a myriad of reasons. And sometimes people have both or none of the above. But I
Right.
think that's an interesting thing. I may be afraid to suffer, but I'm not afraid to die. As for me, I'm not afraid of the suffering. Bring it on. And I'm not afraid to die.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really good distinction that Sharon's making there, Edie. So
Yeah.
you have the fear of death, meaning what? That's what's going to happen to me after I die. Am I afraid of that? Because I don't know what's going to happen after I die. I'm afraid of that. Or versus what Sharon's calling the fear of suffering, which is, I call it the fear of pain and suffering. That's what it is. People are worried about the pain, and that's why morphine is, and painkillers in various forms, typically morphine, especially end of life, are administered to reduce the pain, to reduce the physical pain, and hopefully the intention is to reduce the mental suffering. Okay, because so note the word that I just inserted there, mental suffering. So that's why I call it pain and suffering, because you can have pain without suffering. And so for some people may go, what is he talking about? How could you have pain without suffering? Well, it's possible to experience great discomfort. That's what pain is, right? It's incredibly uncomfortable, great discomfort, extreme discomfort arises to the level we call pain. And you can still not suffer mentally and emotionally from that experience. That is possible. I know that for many people, that concept is confusing, but it is possible. George goes to dentists, and he doesn't get any Novocaine. He gets fillings. He gets this and that done. He gets a tooth pulled. I don't know if he's ever gotten a tooth pulled. Don't quote me on that. But he goes to the dentist, and he does not get any painkillers. Is he suffering from the pain? No, he is not emotionally suffering. George is not the kind of guy who's going to put himself through emotional suffering. Okay, but is he experiencing the pain, the physical pain, the acute discomfort? Yes. And so that's a really good point that Sharon's raising, because because first we need to distinguish the two. So I don't have a fear of either. Now, have I experienced extreme pain before when I died? Yes. You guys know the story. So that memory. So did I like it? No. Did it cause me emotional suffering to the point of what? Losing who I am to the experience. That's how I define suffering. So those of you who have read any of my books, I have this in all of my books, or at least two of my books. I have this model. You see this model that my friend Charlie Donahue, those of you from the old TM organization knew Charlie back in the 1960s and 70s. Conscious of XYZ. Charlie created this model of experience. Conscious of XYZ. Conscious of blank. And most people get so caught up in the XYZs in this experience, we're talking about pain when dying is obviously an experience. They lose themselves in the pain, and they forget who they are, right? They forget who they are. They are not the pain. They are the consciousness side, the experiencer, the mind, the soul, the spirit, whatever word you want to use to substitute there. But you'll hear me use consciousness or the mind. Okay, that's who we are. How do we develop a greater connection between the two sides? Meditation, turning within. That's why many of you have taken my class. The easier, the more effortless. That's a double negative, I know. The less effort, the technique, the more effective it is, the faster it is towards developing this bridging, this connection between the two halves of Charlie Donahue's equation here that applies to every mind. And by the way, to Joe's point, every mind means every angelic mind, every human mind is any mind who's experiencing this model applies to. So to Sharon's point,
Kelvin,
yeah,
there's another
Go ahead.
something that came to my
Go
head.
ahead.
Edith, this
Go
is a
ahead.
great question. The fear of death, the fear of the pain of the death, or the fear of the afterlife. And there is a thing that was brought up in the 30th November of how we lived our life, how we lived and treated other people, and the retribution that may be there. So that might be a real thing of having a fear of what's to come on the other side. I think that's also why penance and confession came about and things of that nature. But also, as George brought up, of the potentiality of the retribution of how we conduct ourselves in this world and what's to come after.
Well, and
Edith,
what we
I see you
talked,
shaking your head. Is that resonating with you? I know
yeah,
you're on
and
mute.
what we talked about in 30th November, what George talked about is there is no structural retribution on the other side. So just to be clear on what Sharon's talking about, there's no hell on the other side. There's no structural punishment on the other side. Are there consequences to one's actions? Yes. Who would deliver the consequence of one's bad actions or good actions, doesn't matter, to oneself? Those to whom we delivered those actions in the first place. So that's not a structural place of hell. So when Sharon's using the word retribution, George was very clear in 30th November that there is no retribution structurally on the other side. But can somebody run into you who you've upset or hurt or cruel to on this side? Can you run into them on the other side? And might they be angry at you on the other side? Yes. But there's no structural hell, and there's no God or gods or panel of judges who's keeping track other than the people you've interacted with on this side and the other side. Are there consequences? Let's talk about this. Are there consequences to one's actions on the other side? Absolutely. And so do you have immediate consequences to all your actions all the time? Because every mind, whether they're a human mind on planet Earth or on the other side, every mind is always living in the continual present. Yes. The short answer is yes. Every angel who's never been incarnated on planet Earth has consequences to its actions as well. Think about that. Get your mind wrapped around that. It's Earth, and being in physical form is not just a place of where your actions have consequences from being in a physical biological form. That's a complete myth that's been created by some of these religious institutions. And why do they create these myths? In order to control people. So what
Well, and on the softer side of the control, perhaps to order for some order and decorum of how to treat people. I'm just playing the little bit of a softer, because control is I'm controlling my free will over you, but even the 10 Commandments and even to a certain extent of the movement of less suffering, less killing, thou shalt not kill. So we can call that control, or we could call that perhaps a guide to being a good human.
Yeah, that's guiding the crowd control, as Witch is saying. But there's a distinction between what you're saying and the myths that were later created. So let's talk about the 30th November aspect in terms of karma and dharma. So George talked about karma and dharma being part of what I call the social science experiment that the movement, Jehovah, Jesus, John the Baptist, Shankara, Swami Brahmananda Saraswati, and 15-20 other core group members of the movement created. Okay, so they create this notion around 10,000 years ago, and as Sharon correctly points out, it's a guide. It's a guide, okay? But then what happened is that other beings along the way remember, you're talking 10,000 years ago, they create this notion of consequences to one's actions. Karma just means, is a Sanskrit word, it just means action. And so they were using it in terms of the way Sharon's using it, as consequences to one's actions and as a guide. Okay. Dharma, for those of you who don't know, is a Sanskrit word. It refers to duty or life purpose. And it was to try to get people. So karma was try to guide people away from just killing people and sacrificing to the gods and doing bad stuff. This is long before 10 Commandments, okay? And Dharma is duty, to try to help people think about, well, maybe you should have this job and do this job in society, in the community, to help the greater good of the group, because there was no societies back then 10,000 years ago, really. There were these small groups and so forth, and there was a lot of killing going on. And so the social science, what I call George and I call it a social science experiment that went on in 10,000 years ago by the movement, was to come up with these concepts to try to guide, to use Sharon's word, guide humanity somewhat. Okay, but it wasn't a thou shalt, it was a guide. Later on, karma took on, many thousands of years later, other people in the spiritual, chain, you could say, started making it into more rules and regulations about karma. You collect good karma, you collect bad karma, and there's this cosmic energy system that's somehow keeping track of it. Or in some schools, it was gods keeping track of who's naughty and who's nice, almost like Santa Claus. No, that was not the initial. That was not the initial. So it kind of morphed. And so when I say control, yeah, it did. I'm telling you the way it is. It started to become a controlling thing societally by the priests and the so forth and so on, who started taking on these roles. And I'm not just talking about, when you hear the word priest, you guys, a lot of you think of Catholicism. I'm talking about 4,000 to 6,000 years ago, long before Christianity. There were many different kinds of priests in many different kinds of other ancient religions who started changing and morphing these concepts that started out as guides, okay? Why? To be more controlling of humanity. And you don't have to do very deep research. You go back and look at Babylonian religions. There's like a zillion Babylonian religions, just in ancient Babylon alone. And you talk about control, you just read some of the history and you'll see what I mean. Very controlling, okay? So, but it didn't start out that way, okay? That there's a morphing that went on there. So just to have a greater context, the things here, okay? Other questions? Does that help, Edie? It's like the pain and suffering is the deal with pain and suffering part has to do with initially experiencing through turning within that the mind and the body are distinct and separate from each other. They're not the same. That's the beginning of reducing our fears about pain and suffering going together. Because as I said, they don't have to go together. They do go together for most people. But that's because most people identify their minds and their bodies as the same thing. They think their brain and their bodies are the same thing. They don't realize that their mind is separate and distinct. The longer you turn within, the more years, the more months and years, in other words, you turn within, the more consistent you are in the practice, the more you expand your conscious capacity of awareness, the more integrated and balanced it becomes within your entire mental, emotional, intellectual, energetic, abstract, from the concrete to the physical to the abstract, it gets integrated. And the fear dissipates, reduces, eventually goes away. So that's the trajectory, okay? In terms of the pain and suffering. Does that help? Sharon, do you have another comment?
Yeah, I wanted to just give a little comment of what we witnessed today about how you just said the integration between the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual of meditation as being a gym for the mind, and how our physical, we think of it as, the gym, the actual gym, with treadmills for the body. So I didn't know if you just wanted to just put your little fingertip on that, because I thought it was a good takeaway.
Yeah. Let me expand a little bit on what Sharon's talking about. She and I just came, first of all, which you got, she and I just came from another seminar on Zoom with another speaker and so forth. And he used this idea of the gym and using different tools and so forth, and meditation being a key tool in that gym for sure, of how to balance and integrate and align our mind, body, emotions, energy, consciousness system. I think that a lot of us tend to forget that they are really connected. The biology and the mind, emotions are very connected. So it's interesting because most people on planet Earth, out of the 8 billion, think that there is no mind. They just think there is a brain and a body, and they're totally connected, and they don't see themselves as separate and distinct. So they only treat the body. So give the body a drug to affect the mind, because we're only affecting the brain. They don't do anything else, right? And then, and of course, that is a basic fundamental, building block in a negative way for the fear of pain and suffering, as we just went through. But as we understand more that the mind and the body are separate and distinct, we start to develop tools like meditation, qigong, Reiki, acupuncture, other things that are affecting our body in an energetic way, right? Because we know our mind doesn't our meditation doesn't affect our mind. We know meditation affects the whole system, including our biological body. Well, so does Reiki, and so does acupuncture, et cetera, and qigong, and so forth. All of these, what people generally put into a category of energetic system, I get it, and they are energetic systems, but we need to understand that we are energy, right? We are energy. Our light bodies, our bodies are bodies of light. George sent a text to there was a group of 3 of us in this text this morning, and I'll just read it to you, and the exact quote that he said. It's interesting how how George languages things a little bit differently from the way I do. But our friend Greg had sent an article about a doctor who has studied 5,000 near-death experiences, and is stating there is life after death. It was a New York Post article, if you want to look it up. And so George said to us in the little text group, he said, it's chipping away. It's chipping away at what he's referring to as the fear of death and the non-belief in an afterlife. George is saying it's chipping away at that, at least. He said, a scientific approach to the possibility of long-lived light bodies will help. I'll read that again. A scientific approach to the possibility of long-lived light bodies will help. What does he mean by that? What George is referring to is that it's not just our mind that is light, we have light bodies too. You and I don't generally see this thing that I'm banging on right here as a body of light, but it is. And some people can see these bodies as light. Some people have some human beings, I'm saying, have the visual in a biological body with biological eyes, and their mind, their consciousness can see, auras. Or it's auras. Auras they're seeing the light.
Well, beyond auras, Kelvin, is also, and I'll just be totally out there. I had my entire large intestine removed. However, it's still there. It's still there. The energetic large intestine is still there. So when I go to my holistic practitioner, we do work to balance the energy between, talking Chinese medicine here, the large intestine and the lungs. And I learned this through him, because he was like, we're working on your large intestine. I said, good luck with that, because I'm sure it's been long gone since 1992, in some Hudson River. However, he told me about, that it's still there, that meridian, that energy. Does
Yeah,
that make sense?
exactly.
Edith, did you want to say
Yes.
something?
No.
That's wild, right?
Yes, really.
Yeah, yeah. You see, if you hear stories like to extend what Sharon's talking about with her own personal story, you hear stories about this all the time in war. When so ever since you go back historically, I mean, you hear writings about this, ancient writings, but during the Civil War, tons of writings of this, because they were cutting limbs off. I don't know if you've ever seen the beginning of some of these movies, like Dances with Wolves, the opening scene of that, literally with a stack of 15 feet high of arms and legs cut off. Okay, because they're trying to prevent gangrene from killing the entire body of the human being, so they immediately would just cut off where the wound was. Okay, so that was the normal, with no anesthesia or anything. You just literally just here, bite on this stick, and then they sawed off the limb. So, but after that, to Sharon's point, they can still feel like they have a limb there. That's their energy.
Yeah. And you know what I do really love, and Bill, oh my God, why? That was a Freudian slip, which
Call him Bill.
William, I'm making myself crack up here. Dearest one, who has a background in, let's just say, past lives of Judaism, of the practice of, especially within the modern Orthodox Hasidic communities, of, even if if I had my large intestine out, I would ask to collect that and bury it, you know what I mean, and honor those pieces. Have you heard of that, Widge? If you could come off of, I know you've done some Judaic scholar. You're on mute, my love.
Sorry,
You're on mute.
Yeah, no, I'm vaguely familiar with that. Yeah, no, I am. Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Has anyone heard of that?
Yeah, burying body parts. Yes, and treating them with reverence, as opposed to just throwing them in the dumpster,
sure.
like the dumpster, like we do in the United States in medical dumpsters. You can't just I'm not saying hospitals just throwing it in the dumpster, but they do. But they literally just they burn them or throw them away. Or they can't, assuming they're not transplants or so forth, or using a body part in somebody else. They literally dispose of it, basically. So, in a very kind of medical way, we'll just say. But yeah, other questions? I want to comment on something that Joe said. So, and other people have questions. Let me just make a comment about something. Joe mentioned that about the need for helping folks on the other side, that how Jehovah and Jesus and John the Baptist in particular have told us, and probably others as well involved in this effort, but they in particular have told us that George and me anyway, that they're on the other side, spending most of their time focusing on helping the other side move away from the thinking, the kind of divinity, guru, master, disciple, guru, divinity kind of belief, because that belief system inculcates this hierarchical levels view, because obviously they put God up here, or the guru, or Jesus up here, or whatever. So Jesus is literally going around on the other side telling people not to deify him on the other side, because Jesus and Jehovah are not just deified on this side. Those of you, any of you who have ever been to any mediums and psychics and so forth, who are really, good mediums and psychics, and they're not just, I say that because they're not, in other words, ones that are not just making it up in their own mind and are tuned in with beings on the other side, will hear a lot of this angelic, I'll call it what it is, worship of Jehovah and Jesus on the other side. And then there are other groups who consider Jesus just a regular Joe Blow. It's like, oh, there's this huge range of belief systems and religious, what I call religious beliefs on the other side, but a lot of hierarchies. And so the hierarchical thing is what creates suffering and cruelty. So what does Kelvin mean by that? So George could only touch on this in the 30th November talk because, as you guys know, who you've seen it, he ran out of time, okay? He thought it was a 2-hour talk. He looked at his watch. Finally, I was waving to him. He didn't see me because the lights were so bright. And it was 2 hours, and he goes, oh, you see him at the end of the talk, right? He goes, oh my God. Oh, he didn't go, oh my God. He goes, oh my, it's 2 hours and 50 minutes. He was like 3 hours in, and he thought it was going to be, he's looking at his watch. He figured it was 1:45 into it, and he figured he had another 15 minutes to wrap stuff up or whatever, but he was way over. He was way over. The point is, he did not have time to get into this levels thing and how it leads to cruelty, because why? Levels means you are better than, or you are more evolved than, however adjective you want to use. It's a better than somebody else, okay? And whether you have this better than view on this side or the other side, that you're somehow better than or more evolved, you're at level one, and I wish I was at level 5. All this level stuff, this hierarchical stuff, makes people feel lacking in their own self-confidence and their own empowerment. It disempowers people, doesn't it? I mean, what level can you think of that empowers people? Now, you may say it motivates people to move up the level, but when you're at the lowest level, you're not feeling really empowered like the ones way up the top levels in your hypothetical hierarchical system, right? And so what does that do? And the ones who are feeling better sometimes will bully the ones down below. They're not really better. They're better in the system. They're not really self-confident. That's why bullies bully, right? So George got into that a little bit. He just stuck his little pinky toe into that water because he ran out of time. But that's why the movement is so focused. Jehovah, Jesus, John the Baptist especially, Swami Brahmananda Saraswati, Maharishi's teacher, so focused on reducing this divinity idea is because it leads to cruelty and it also leads to slavery. Now, I don't
Kelvin,
know
thank you for saying reducing, because in our beautiful human and maybe not human existence, we do that. You know, this one's a better friend to me than that one. You know, she has better hair than I do. This one has, we just do that, you know. But to reduce it in the sense of the deification, however, there will always be some type of hierarchy. Kelvin's a better friend than the other one. This one's a better lover than that one. This was, you know, there's always a comparison. And when you have comparison, and you have your own mind and free will to compare and contrast, which is a beautiful thing, we put things on different levels. Well, this one is a 10 out of 10. This one's a 0 out of 0. This one's a 2 out of 2. We do that on an individual basis.
Well, what's the but Sharon, what's the teaching?
Reducing of it.
Reducing of it,
is something we can strive for.
Reducing of it is the teaching. So nobody is so naive, Pollyanna-ish, to think that this will ever go away. But if we are to help humanity on Earth and on other planets and help the angels on the other side shift to be less cruel, this concept needs to be embraced. So reducing, nobody's thinking that it will ever completely go away, because, as Sharon says, there's always going to be people who are feeling less confident inside who are going to bully somebody else. But that's the root cause of bullying. It's not some energetic evil force in the universe. that's something that was created by humans and maybe angels too on the other side, and it's been promoted, and it's an incorrect notion.
Oh, sure.
And that's,
As you
and
know,
that's,
they have their own levels. The cherubs are here, the archangels are here.
and that,
you
and
know.
that's what, and that's why Jehovah and Jesus and John the Baptist, as Joe reminded us at the beginning of this session, are spending so much of their time on the other side because it is so inculcated. Now, why is it so inculcated on the other side? Because they don't get so distracted like we do on this side by playing those games with business in corporate America, at the PTA on this side. They don't have that stuff on the other side. What do they have? Well, their mind
Ego.
can create anything. Exactly. So they have all of this ego mind stuff to play around with, and that's their playground. And that's true. What Sharon just said. That's the unfortunate truth on the other side. So that's why they have said to George and me, Jehovah, Jesus in particular, and Maharishi John the Baptist in particular, said to us that it's more challenging on the other side than it even is on Earth. So think about that. Wrap your mind around that. So in terms of the perfection idea that we talked about earlier, right? So that's why I'm teaching discernment. And I see your hand up, Jamie. I'll get to you in a second. That's why I'm teaching discernment with my students, to help my students figure things out, look through a lens. Does this make sense? Do I want to go down this road or that road? And that's true on planet Earth, and it's going to be true on the other side. So
And I
discernment,
think you just said it, the discernment, the reduction, and the awareness. When I'm aware of saying, hey, I'm kind of getting into too much of my ego mind, and I'm starting to compare and contrast, and I really don't need to get so wrapped up into that. And of course, that the turning within, or AKA meditation, that does help us center and ground ourselves to not get so swept away. But it's not easy.
No,
it's not easy. Let go of my ego. Remember those waffles? That was a great commercial.
Yeah, and I'm the first one to tell people, and you guys have heard me, or if you watch some of my YouTube videos, I'm the first one to say that I'm not perfect with all of this stuff. I've mastered some of it. Absolutely. So that's the one absolute truth I can say, So, there is no perfect. We're all growing, but there's principles is what we're trying to teach, is principles that will help promote less suffering, to Edie's point, and more contentment, less cruelty. So it's relative. There's no absolutes here, as Sharon points out. It's reducing. Can we overcome it for long periods of time? Yes. Are you still susceptible to falling back in? Yes. But can you overcome it for longer and longer periods of time? Yes. It's the longer and longer. It's the reducing and reducing. It's the relative growth. That's what we're talking about. So, Jamie, you had your hand up for a while ago.
Hi, Kelvin.
Hey.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Jamie.
Hello. Yeah, I put my hand down because I kind of lost my bottle a bit on one of the shares that I wanted to make. But a lot of these things are really touching on things that are bubbling up in me at the moment. A lot of the discussions that you're having at the moment, like when you mentioned earlier about when Sharon mentioned the fear of going to the other side and having to face the people that you may have wronged and that sort of thing. I've had a very kind of a deep visceral feeling of of shame, really. I've done something wrong, and I think that was why I was really quite nervous about meeting George.
Mm.
It was
Mm.
almost like I felt, but I can't put it down to anything. I don't know why. It was just the nervousness part of it was, oh, what's he going to think of me when he sees me? Because I knew I recognized him, and I knew that we had met previously, obviously in another life. We had never met in this life.
Mm.
And what was it? And it was it's just it's I find it quite fascinating, and I'm getting more and more curious about it now. Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to share and then lost my bottle
Jamie?
about, but I'm going to try. Yeah.
Jamie, all is forgiven.
Oh, thanks.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So okay, right. I'm gonna go for it. So the other thing that I wanted to share and lost my bottle about, but I'm going to share anyway, is that after the second time of watching the 30th November talk, uh, I felt this anger bubbling up inside of me, and this terrible feeling of being judged by Jesus and Jehovah and the people in the movement, that I needed to be improved by them. And I think that touched on this shame and guilt that I've been carrying. And I've kind of I ended up having this anger about them, and I just thought, who the hell do these people think they are? You know, looking down on me, and it I my mind just
Oh, I had
suddenly.
that same thought about George. No,
Oh,
when I watched it. No, it's a lot to take in. Kelvin's
oh,
laughing because he knows I had a very extreme reaction to 30th November when I watched, right, Kelvin? And then I fell
really?
asleep like the next 7 times watching it. And then the principles kind of soaked in. Kelvin, do you remember that?
Hmm.
I was like, who does he think he is? I see God the Father. How dare he? You know.
Wow. Okay, thanks. That really helped. But then my mind, I just suddenly realized, oh my God, I've been living my whole life doing that to other people. Back in school, all of my friends were like the weird kids, or the kids, the uncool kids, and I was trying to help them. I was trying to build them up. I was trying to, you know, improve them. And I thought, oh my God, I've been doing that all of my life with loads of my friends and in the past. And then I just suddenly thought, oh my God, I can see what they were doing, why they were doing it, the place they were coming from, in order to do that. And it opened up a huge well of empathy with what they're doing. And then I thought, that is probably why I'm here. You know,
Wait,
joining this group, being around these people, and
are
just
you saying, Jamie, that do you feel badly that you were helping the people and you felt like you were pushy? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, absolutely, yeah. It's like
So
yeah, absolutely. It was kind of like trying to be the hero. I'm here to save you. I want to save you from your.
yeah,
So I was judging them as being sad, or
yeah,
you know,
right.
missing out on something, and it was
Well,
just a
see,
real
I'm
eye opener.
okay. So I am not you. I am not in your mind. You're going to have to assess this, but I want to say a couple of things to you on that. One is that
Yeah,
if you came from a place, an open-hearted place, where you really saw somebody in need, and you were there genuinely to help them, then there's nothing wrong with that. That's not taking away somebody's free will. Okay, so
mm,
it's free will is it's not a philosophical term. It like some people think. This is a term, to me, it's a simple, well, simple, it's not so simple, but it is a phrase that describes our behavior and our actions, and how we can act in a loving way with others and still help them. So if you're not forcing yourself on them, then I still think you're doing good, and you're being too harsh on yourself when you hear the phrase free will. Okay, because I understand how you could, not just you, but all of us, any of us, could take the words free will and take it a little bit too extreme in terms of its harshness. It doesn't mean to just sit back and let everybody do whatever. It's when we see somebody in need, we step up. It's like, I'm not going to just say, well, okay, a lady just fell or a guy just fell on the street, and I'm just going to let them lie there because their free will is they can get up or not. I'm going to go over and help them, you know? So
Yeah.
I don't know if that where the line is. It's not a black and white line, is what I'm saying. There's grayness here, okay? And so that's between you and yourself to decide. I can't decide that, okay?
Kelvin, I love how you put that. We had a question from Jem in the chat, and then we have Jean, next raising her hand. And I just wanted to just touch upon one thing. I also had a visceral reaction of, and George did put pulling the curtain back, right? So I actually felt like I was duped my whole life. These people, which now we understand that, if you're here, you are probably part of that movement. These people, including ourselves, what was this, a sham? What were they trying to do? Just manipulate all of us? Were we like not science experiments, but spiritual experiments, right? However, then I kind of step back a little bit and viewing in the sense of what Kelvin is saying, I get a little choked up too. Jesus and many others, but really I haven't seen a heart like his yet. I still look, but I haven't found it yet.
You live in hope.
Yeah. That his heart is in such a good place that it was really just like what you were saying of yourself, Jamie, that I just want to help. I just want to help. I want to help. It wasn't like, hey, let's play around with these people down there and come up with Moses. It really is coming from such a beautiful heart space that it's really an act of love for us.
That's a great analogy, Sharon, as it relates to the others, in the movement. That said, what they are saying, heads up, just keep an eye out. So that's the thing, but not to create guilt here, Jamie. I'm trying to assuage your guilt feeling here. Okay, that's where I'm going here with this. You see, because guilt is only going to create contraction, and that's going to create increased likelihood of repeat, right?
Yes.
Right.
Kelvin. Because I know I know that Jem was first because it was a long time ago when we were talking about hierarchy.
Jem had something, and then Jem and Jean.
If there is or was a God, it was probably just someone with more knowledge and much better technology. So I guess that's a very powerful being for sure. Kelvin, I guess it's more of a comment, Jem.
Yeah, I think that comment, Jem, makes me think of this. The short answer is I agree with you. So whoever you're thinking, whoever is, either thinks they're God or acts as God or other people view them as God, you're right. It must be somebody who's got, or some being who has more knowledge than others. Okay. In certain areas is the key phrase that I would underline if I was writing this down. In certain areas. Because you've heard me talk about this in other talks where I say there is no such thing as omniscience, knowing everything about everything. That because that means that there is no free will, that everything is predetermined. And George's point on omniscience is to know everything means to know what it's like to know nothing. So it's a logical impossibility. This is how Plato thinks, okay? George, you guys know it's Plato. So Pythagoras. So this is how he articulates that. To know everything means you have to know what it's like to know nothing. All right? And then, so you're in this conundrum of impossibility of knowing everything, and the impossibility, it must mean you know nothing. When if you know nothing, then you can't know everything. Okay? Everybody follow that? So omniscience is logically impossible. And then it also, from my standpoint, it prevents growth. That means that there is no growth if you can become enlightened, perfect, or godlike, or God. There is no growth. There is no continued growth.
And if there's no
Right.
continued growth, there's no such thing as change for that person, because change
Right.
is growth is change, and change is growth. And that is how time is measured. There
Exactly.
you go.
Great point. Great follow-up points. Sharon just brought it home. Okay. So
All right, Gene, we got Gene waiting right after your point.
Eternity seems to exist. You cannot have eternity with omniscience and perfection. They do not go together. Go ahead, Gene.
Okay, bear with me. I'm a little bit nervous asking questions on camera, but
Okay.
talking about fear of death or afterlife, this is all very new to me, since I've only been on this rabbit hole of even considering what happened after life, having grown up in a family of scientists and atheists, and just changing my mind while dealing with the death of my mother a little less than a year ago, and just researching.
I'm so sorry, Gene.
Oh, thank you. At any rate, I have been listening to hundreds of NDEs, and also reading them, and listening to studies on consciousness. And one of the things that keeps coming up more and more is people's experience of having NDEs where they came to the conclusion that once they got to the afterlife, and had the experience of having a life review and judging their own actions, they felt they were being manipulated into being forced into reincarnation. And I imagine you've heard this before, since it seems to be a theory going around in the NDE series, in the NDE world, that there's some kind of entities controlling, like trying to trip you into feeling like you ought to go back and reincarnate.
Wow, that's horrible.
I'm wondering if you what you think about that, and also like a lot of this comes down to, no matter if that happens or whatever happens, I'm curious what you think of how much autonomy you have coming in from this life, for instance, trying to figure out all that I'm trying to prepare myself for to not be tricked into anything, and to calmly make up my decision of where I want to proceed after I leave this existence.
Okay,
I'll just
great
turn off
question. Really
Kelvin,
good
can you
question.
just answer, because you shook your head? I'm very curious as to this thought processes on this NDE of, you're going to guilt trip you to go back down, so it's Groundhog Day, you got to get it right. Who is saying that? Is it coming from a specific school of thought?
No,
Follow the school of thought.
This is coming from different minds who just want to control other people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And have you ever run into anybody on this side who wants to control people's minds? Hello. So these people
sounds like my Catholic guilt background.
Whatever. The people are on this side, they die, they're on the other side. And then have you ever heard any mediums talking to angels or dead incarnate beings who, or not dead, but disincarnate? In other words, disincarnate means never been physical, but they're not in physical form, and maybe never been in physical form. That's what I call an angel. Anyway, that's my definition of angel. You know, have you ever heard of a medium saying that an angel is saying these things? Yes. So there's going to be minds, Gene, everywhere in the universe who want to manipulate and control people. I'm not saying this from a fear standpoint. I'm just saying that this is fact. This is fact. So that's exactly why I teach the way, and what I teach is to teach you how to discern exactly what you said, so that you can make your own decisions based on informed information that makes sense. So first of all, Gene, there's a whole bunch of pieces of this. Let me just hit some bullet points on some of these pieces. First of all, you always have choice. Nobody can take away your choice, your free will. That's what free will means. It means personal choice. It means each individual has choice over every decision they make, whether you come back or don't come back, okay? This notion that you hear NDEers talk about, some NDEers talk about, is because they have been talking with people on the other side who have that belief system that they can control you. And so the NDEer gets controlled by that person, right? The NDEer gets controlled by that person. Is everybody still hearing me? And my ear pods are going out on me. Does everybody still hear me? Hello, hello. Hello.
Yeah.
Yes,
still hear
yeah,
you.
perfectly.
All right,
Yeah.
good. I just wanted to make sure, because I think both of my earpods just went out. So you can still hear me. So here, there are tons of NDEers who are full of fear. All right. And they may have belief systems that believe that they are going to be told, because they've watched so many of these videos, Gene, that I suggested you don't watch so many of, because then you're going to start creating this own belief system in your own mind that's incorrect. All right. I'm not a proponent of watching thousands and thousands, like some people do, of these YouTube videos that reinforce incorrect thinking. All right. That's a problem.
Good point.
Right. So it's either their belief system, the NDEer, and or we cannot tell. I'm not reading minds here, but it's and or the belief system of the beings who are telling them that. Either way, it's wrong. Okay. Everybody has choice. Now, the NDEer who cannot discern, keyword discern, distinguish, because they have not gone through the Kelvin Chin school of discernment. I'm just joking. But seriously, that's what I'm teaching. They have not discerned the fact that their desire is a choice. Think of that phrase I just said. Desire is a choice. Most people don't view their desires as choices. Every desire you have is a choice that your mind is making. It's putting out energy. What are thoughts and feelings? Energy. We've already established that. Light, energy, whatever we call it. Our thought waves go out. It's energy. Those desires are energy. Those are choices. That a choice is simply a thought that has an emotion and a direction. That's how I define desire. A thought that has emotion and direction. Energy is thought, right? So we could say an energy that has direction and emotion is a desire. That's a choice in my world, all right? I think I've broken it down hopefully enough so that that makes sense to you. So these people who are saying, oh, it wasn't my choice to come back. You know, they told me I had to come back. Yeah, well, you believed them. You listened and acted on their thought because your desire made you come back. The desire to follow what they said made you come back. The belief is a desire. All of those desires made you come back. You chose to come back. They think that they were forced to come back. You hear this over and over and over again, all these NDEs. Oh, I had to come back because they told me I had to come back and finish this work. My grandfather told me I had to come back. Okay, fine. Your grandfather told you to come back. You listened to your grandfather. That was your choice. Did you listen to your grandfather when he was alive and he told you to marry this guy down the street who was a jerk and you had no physical, emotional attraction to the guy? No. Then why are you listening to the grandfather, the same grandfather who's on the other side? Just because he's on the other side and he supposedly knows better? No, he doesn't. It's the same mind on the other side. That's the thing. Jean, does that help?
Yeah, that's a lot of great answers in there, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. So listen to it again and unbundle it, because there's a lot of concepts I bullet pointed in there. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Jean, thank you so much for asking that. I think I really do appreciate that. I actually did have a nearing death experience, and I had a wonderful experience. You know, I met my grandfather, and it was just a beautiful space and place. But I have heard of people having adverse experiences, which actually could be frightening, you know. So thank you, you know, for giving a full scope of the nearing death experience. We don't hear a lot about those, right? It's more like la la la.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, Jem, I see your hand up, Jem. You may have to hit *6 on your phone.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we got you.
Great. Okay. I was just thinking about, you were talking about, you know, that we don't have to be friends with everybody on the other side any more than we have to, you know, cuddle up with anyone here, and about discerning. And I guess there are a lot of people that would think I'm a really terrible person because I never want to see my maternal grandmother again in my life. She was abusive. She burned my hands. I still have the scars. She was abusive to my mom, you know, and I just don't want that in my life anymore, ever, anywhere. So it's good to know that we can be free of that in the afterlife. So it's really not a question. It's just, I wanted to say that I appreciate so much your teaching that we still have our free will on the other side. And thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for your comment, Jem. And we absolutely, just to underscore, absolutely, we retain our free will wherever our mind is. This side, the other side, doesn't matter. Another planet, who knows where. We always retain our free will, our personal choice. And on the other side, it's easier to get away from that person you don't want to be with, Jem, because you are a light being, and light beings can travel really fast. We don't have to get in a car. You just thought, energy, right? And you could, boom, be elsewhere. And the other thing, it's kind of, the other last thing I want to talk about is organization. And there is organization of Jesus and Jehovah have organized a part, we'll say a part of heaven, because it's huge, okay? But a part of heaven where you can hang out with your friends in different areas and not be bothered, Jem. That helps also, okay? Yeah, Sharon?
And I really think the principle of free will is just so very important. I know it's out there, but reiterating it. I do work for hospice, and you know, and not my current intern, but another intern, and just really full heart, right? And you know, this woman, and just having a lot of suffering, or looked like she was having a lot of suffering, and then and then she got really peaceful. She got really peaceful, and the intern felt very like, oh, what's going on? She seems less alert with the full heart. Jem, very similar to your story, right? The intern comes in and says, don't worry about it. It's okay to let go. Your loved ones are going to be on the other side. All of a sudden, the woman starts thrashing around. What did I do? Little did she know, that woman suffered a lifetime of physical, mental, emotional abuse from her husband, and he went before her. Okay, so it's very important to understand, oh, that's what's waiting for me on the other side. Oh, no, let's stay here. Free will and choice. You don't have to go hang out with him over there. You are safe, you are protected, you are loved. And Jem, you don't have to go hang out with her over there. And I'm so very sorry that you suffered that kind of abuse at the hands of your maternal grandmother.
Yeah. Good anecdote, Sharon. Really good point. Yeah. Really good point. It's a place, think of heaven as a vacation place. We don't have a biological body. We don't have to eat and food and job and money and all of that stuff doesn't exist. Shelter, don't need on it, any of that. So it's much easier. So it's much less stressful, definitely. Do we take our minds with us? Yes. Does somebody who's been a jerk all of a sudden not become a jerk? Well, my hope is that they'll become less of a jerk because they yeah, I mean, I'm a cup half full guy, so, but I'm a realist too, right? So my cup half full tells me, I hope they become less of a jerk because why? Because this jerk who was a jerk to me on this side, now he or she doesn't have to have a job, doesn't have to take care of babies, doesn't have to, whatever, be frazzled and worry about money and, all that stuff they don't have. So I'm hoping that if they still a jerk, hopefully they'll be not a jerk, but if they're still going to be a jerk, because that's how they're wired, they'll be less of a jerk on the other side. But do I have to hang out with them if I run into them? No, I just give them the peace sign and says, hey, peace out, see you later. And I'm on the other side of the galaxy, because I can travel so fast or whatever, the equivalent of the galaxy on the other side. Just really, and as I said, I meant it seriously, Jem, that Jehovah and Jesus have said that they've kind of created, especially Jehovah, has created kind of, I don't know how to describe it, but kind of like areas where, lots of friends can hang out and just be in the friend group kind of there on vacation. It's a vacation. It's a place to recuperate from the trials and tribulations of being in a biological form. Now, you chose to come back here. You don't remember it. You don't, and remember what I say about desire when I was talking to Jean earlier. That's a choice. And, just some people will come back. I'm not saying you guys, but some people will just come back because their desire is so strong to get drunk. They have a really strong desire to get inebriated.
Ice cream.
Or ice cream. Yes. Oh, the soft serve ice cream. I have one of my clients. I used to say this to her. I say, soft serve. She goes, oh, you hit me. You hit my weak. And I said that you could have just come back from the soft serve. She says, why did I come back? It's so difficult. And my husband, this and that. And she was going through a terrible divorce and this and that and yada, yada, yada. And I said, I don't know. You've told me about soft serve ice cream, right? She went, no pun intended. She melted when I said that. She just, oh yeah, there could have been that. So what I'm teaching all of us is to make better. Don't just have soft serve ice cream on the desire list. Have a bunch of other stuff. I want a really good spouse. I want to have really great children. I want to maybe connect specifically with this spouse. Maybe really connect specifically with these children. Be as more thoughtful about the list than just having soft serve ice cream on the list, like maybe she did. I want to say one other thing to Jean.
And Kelvin, maybe we all do. And especially, and I don't want to leave out our lovely, and who knows, you come back, male, female. I know I've just always been a female. To give yourself a right, maybe even starting now, to say, I can ask for everything. I can ask for what I want and need and deserve. I am worthy to ask for more. It starts now. It doesn't start over there. It starts right now. We take our minds, we take our personalities with us.
Yes.
How we live now is how we live there, how we live in the future.
It's a really good point. So some of you know I spoke before I wrote my first book on overcoming the fear of death. I had the ideas in my head, obviously, and I gave a talk at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco. And to Sharon's point, I gave the talk in San Francisco at the Commonwealth Club, and there were 3 or 4 media outlets who showed up, and so I was in the green room afterwards, and they were interviewing me. And I cannot remember the guy from Business Insider, the journalist from Business Insider, asked me a question. Whatever the question was, my answer in relation to what Sharon just so astutely suggested, my answer to him, I don't know where this came from, was, you know how people talk about their bucket list, and they talk about their bucket list as stuff they want to do before they die? I told him, my bucket list starts now and after I die. That's my bucket list. So I have created a bucket list now that applies after I die. That's kind of what Sharon's saying, right? Start now. And so I said to this journalist, Business Insider journalist, I want to remember everything. Now, I remember a lot, but I want to remember everything, that from the moment I biologically die, to the other side, go to the other side, who I see, what happens, this, that, blah, 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 where I hang out, for how long I'm hanging out on the other side. Then I have a meeting with certain friends to create a soul plan on the other side. I want to remember all the details. Now, those of you who've read my 3rd book, you'll see that I recalled one of them more recently. But I want my degree of memory to be complete, so complete, that when I come back in to my next lifetime, I remember everything that I'm saying to you guys right now. That's what Sharon is kind of saying that I said to this reporter, right? That's my bucket list, right? So, Gene, I want to, I'll take one last question after this, but I want to, if there is one, but I want to say this to Gene and everybody about, on the other side, this notion of free will on the other side. So there's this guy who had this NDE. I don't know the guy, but he had this NDE, and he was describing this, where he had a guru. So he was I didn't know him through the meditation world or anything, but evidently he was a meditation person, and he had a guru who had died already on the other side now. And when this guy has his NDE, he has 2 beings on the other side arguing with each other about whether he should go back to Earth or whether he should stay on the other side. His guru is telling him he should go back to Earth because he's got work to finish, whatever they were working on together before the guru died, his meditation guru. And then there's this powerful light being on the other side, very, very, very bright light being, who's saying, no, you should stay here. You should stay here on this side. There's no need for you to go back. You don't have to go back. And the guru is saying, you got to go back. Obviously, he listened to his guru. But that's a great example, Jane and everybody, of beings, plural, on the other side disagreeing about whether a soul, in this case, this person having the NDE, should go back or not. And how he chose, it was his free will choice. Obviously, he chose to come back, right? Doesn't mean that everybody on the other side knows what's good for you. That's the thing. You decide. Does that help, Gene? Yeah?
Yeah, that's a nice story. Thanks. Although I like the idea of him better not listening to his guru and having chosen to stay because he didn't know the being of light, apparently, whereas the guru would be more likely to influence, and possibly something he also manifested with his own belief.
But it doesn't matter, see. So you say you'd prefer that he stay on the other side. I look at it and I go, no, he made a choice that was his choice. Maybe he listened to his guru, maybe he didn't. I don't know.
I guess
I'm conjecturing.
That's the point. Yeah. I guess if he didn't just go by what the guru told him, then it's a better idea that he just made up his own mind completely.
It's better, but then again, people can still, to Sharon's point, There's still going to be master disciple gurus coming around on planet Earth for the next million years. But the message out of the 30th November talk is that the heads up from the movement is all of these major gurus, the Maharishis of the world, the Yoganandas of the world, all the Babajis of the world, all these major gurus that have come down the pike, the Trodikacharyas of the world, the Shankaras and the Vyasas of the world, all the major gurus that are been known through history aren't going to be gurus anymore. They're going to be your friends. That's the message out of the 30th November. So you're right. Yeah, you know, it'd be nice if he didn't. I don't know, because he didn't say when he said this. That's my conjecture, Gene, that he listened. I don't know if he listened to Guru, but he did come back. That's the point. He listened to himself and he came back, whatever. But the point is that story is that there's argument on the other side, disagreement. So don't believe anything that anybody just tells you because they're on the other side. And somebody mentioned, I don't know if it was Gene or somebody who mentioned about life review. Life review is just flipping through your 2,500 pictures on your phone. That's all that is. You can.
We do life review every day. Sometimes I sit
Exactly.
and think of what I've done, you know?
Thank you. It's not a punishment. It's not a proof of that that's hell or something. Some people will use it that way. No. It's just a life review. It's just like looking through stuff. And not everybody does a life review. You can do one if you want, but like Sharon said, she starts her life reviews on this side. It's good. It's a good idea.
Every single day, I hit the bed and think about what I did. So maybe that's my personality, you know, and maybe your personality, maybe, all right, do you do life reviews here? Yeah, sure. Well, maybe there's a good chance you'll have a life review, you know?
Exactly. Anything else before we go? We're at the end of our session today, but any other burning questions before we call it a session? Anybody else? Comments, questions, anything? All right, good to see everybody. We'll see you in a month. Come up with any other questions. If you cannot join us, just shoot me an email. Send me an email with your questions and we'll answer them in the next session. Anybody who's watching this recording, all you got to do is find me, go to kelvinchin.org. It's my nonprofit spiritual website, and then go to the contact page and send me an email with a question if you're not already connected with me. Anybody who's watching this, great to see everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.